I know this is a very jam-packed, intense conversation over the course of a few hours, but we saved the best for last. I'm really excited to introduce to you our keynote speaker this evening. Although he doesn't need an introduction, I think he deserves an introduction, and that is Minnesota's own Attorney General Keith Ellison. Attorney General Ellison was sworn in as Minnesota's 30th Attorney General on January 7, 2019. As the people's lawyer, Attorney General Ellison's job is to help Minnesotans afford their lives and live with dignity, safety, and respect. His guiding values are generosity and inclusion. Before becoming Attorney General, Keith Ellison represented Minnesota's 5th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives from 2007 to 2019. And before his time in the U.S. Congress, he served 4 years in Minnesota's House of Representatives. Prior to entering elected office, he spent 16 years as an attorney specializing in civil rights and defense law, including 5 years as executive director of the Legal Rights Center. Attorney General Ellison will speak, has some prepared remarks, and then Justice Page and I will join him for a conversation here on stage. Please join me in welcoming Keith Ellison.
Let me thank all of you for the great work that you've been doing. I mean that. Being administrators in our schools, teaching in our classrooms, running after-school programs, being an active civic leader, community groups, all the things that you have been doing, I want to thank you for. And it's been good work. And yet we don't have the outcomes we're looking for. And yet we have an abysmal disparity between white students and other students of color. And yet we know we've got to have all students able to fully participate and get the benefit of a quality public education in this state if we are going to have a future as a state. And so even though I want to say great job, I'm only going to give you one clap. Because we got a whole lot more work to do in order to reach our potential as a state. And I think that one of the best ways for a group of talented people to be successful when they aren't being as successful as they would like to be is to get back to the basics and understand that we have got to review and interrogate purpose. The idea that the people of the state of Minnesota are going to make paramount quality public education as a fundamental right for our kids is a value statement which orients us, I believe, around what we all need to be doing. It's a value statement which helps focus our attention, and in many ways, the journey that we are embarking on right now is the destination. Earlier, the question was asked, how are you going to get people's attention on this issue? Well, if this room is any indication, we've already got some attention on the issue. I hope that you go back and dispute language that you see in the proposed amendment. I hope that you say, well, it could be better if we did this. And I want many of others of you to defend the language that's there. Because it is this discussion that we have got to have that is going to help propel us to a better future than the one that we have. But I just want to say to you this, when we have the worst disparities, when we have abysmal failure when it comes to educating all kids, and when a proposal comes out and the only answer you have is no, then that's not good. Let's try yes if, okay as long as, right? Or I'll even go for no unless. But just no, full stop, period, is a non-starter, not with the crisis that we have in front of us. Not with the crisis we have in front of us. You know, the fact of the matter is that the answers to the most difficult questions facing us at this very moment are locked up in the mind of a preschooler who is in a shelter. The answers to climate change, racial harmony, police accountability, the answers to renewable energy, the answers to shared prosperity, a green future, the answers to the problems that keep many of you awake at night are locked up in that child's mind. But just like gold under the ground, you don't get it unless you dig for it. And no means, you ain't digging. It's fine how it is. It's good enough. It's adequate. Let me tell you, even if the constitutional standard is adequate, adequate for us can't be good enough. Even if the Constitution is a uniform standard of education, adequate education. I'm like, that might be what the law says, but not everything in the law is right. We're coming up on Martin Luther King's birthday. Everything he did was illegal. He got arrested 30 times. 30 times, because what he did was against the law, but he was morally right. So today, the idea that we, us together, can say, we're going to say that kids have a fundamental right to a quality public education in Minnesota, and we all are going to get together and say and then we're going to make sure that it's that because we're going to measure it. I'm not talking tests. I say measure, people say tests. Can't we be more creative than that? If we are bold enough to do that, I'm telling you that it could set in motion a trajectory that 10 years from now will have us all extremely proud of our education system. And today, we might be able to be proud of certain pieces of it, but we can't be proud of the whole thing. In Minnesota, we can say, oh, our kids got the highest SATs and ACTs except for, and then we got a lot of explaining to do. But I believe that if this state can educate white kids, it can educate black ones. I believe that if this state can educate upper middle class kids, it can educate working class kids. I believe that we can do it. The question is, do we want to do it? And once we say we want to do it, are we willing to do it? That is actually the real challenge. But if we set our purpose right, every kid has a fundamental right to a quality public education. If we set our purpose correct, then we will be unlocking a whole lot of things. Because that 7-year-old African-American boy who maybe came to school on my shelter bus that morning, he will not be a miniature suspect in the minds of some people. He will be the holder of a fundamental right. And that will change the minds of people. And if they don't want to change their minds, then other people will help them see the light. We have in front of us an opportunity, and I don't think we should let it pass. We have in front of us an opportunity, and I think that we should embrace it. And let me say that if every child in this state has a fundamental right to a quality public education, the people who provide that right are going to have job security. So I encourage people in the education field to embrace it, to look at it as a chance, to make your profession the profession that locks in opportunity and is expected to deliver on it. Now, let me just say this for our teachers. We don't expect you to do it alone. I know this is a real concern, and I don't blame you for raising this as a concern. But let me assure you that my presence in support of this amendment is predicated on the idea that this is something that we all have to do. It is perfectly legitimate for you to say, okay, society, you won't even pay their parents a livable wage. You won't even have them in a decent, affordable housing. You make them live next to a toxic waste dump. And then when you drop them off to us and say, make them all valedictorians. That's not okay. And let me say this to the business community, and I'm glad you're here. It is a problem to come to the legislature and say, we don't want to pay any taxes, but we want high quality public education and a very well-educated workforce. You know, I promised Neel and Justice Page I would be nice today. That's the only tough thing I'm going to say. But I just want to ask our business leaders, are you telling us that, yes, you'll pay the taxes if you get the outcomes you're looking for? Because if that's what you say, we will take that challenge. If that is your point, fine, let's do it. But if it's just like, if the economy's doing good, I need a tax cut. If it's doing bad, I need a tax cut. And if it's doing up and down, I need a tax cut. Then don't come to us about the state of education, public education, because you're not helping. Is that a deal? I think I heard, yeah, that's a deal. Okay. I believe that it's time to finally commit to investing in early education, which I believe quality, affordable public education implies. I believe it's finally time to deliver and make serious commitments on our kids' mental health, which I believe quality, affordable public education implies. It's hard to learn when you're deeply traumatized. We have to respond. If a kid has a fundamental right to learn, they have a fundamental right to be emotionally well. I think it's time to put an end to disparate discipline. This is a serious problem. And earlier I alluded to this. I said a kid has a right to be considered the holder of a fundamental right to education as opposed to a suspect. I know many of you don't want to believe that. It's true. Your Attorney General walked into Detroit Public Schools at 7 years old under suspicion of wrongdoing and was disparately disciplined when his schoolmates weren't for the same behavior. Don't tell me it wasn't because I was black. I know exactly what was happening, and everyone else did too. And if you think that that's not going on in Minneapolis schools or Minnesota schools, it is happening. But it may not be happening consciously. There's such thing as implicit bias. And when judges used to say, that kid, I gave him a break because he just reminds me of myself when I was a kid. I was just a little scamp. That kid, the kid with the saggy pants and the braids he don't remind me of myself. I'm scared of him. He needs a harsher punishment. Now, did the judge say, I'm going to do this one thing for the white kid, I'm going to do this other thing for the black kid? No. It was just a gut level reaction. And understand this about human beings. Emotion drives choice, not rationality and logic. We've got to unlearn things we have learned. None of us was around for the 250 years that this nation was slaveholding. Very few of us were around when it was a Jim Crow society for the next 100 years. And all of us inherited these last 60 years where we're dealing with the legacy of those first 350 years. So it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility to build liberty and justice for. It is our responsibility. And I can think of no better place to start than in our educational system. I believe that inside of our schools, we need to commit to early childhood education. We need to commit to mental health for our kids, and we need to put an end to disparate discipline. But outside of our schools, we need help too. The idea of a fundamental right, I hope, signals something to people who work in the housing world and says, if a kid is highly mobile, if a kid doesn't even know where they're going to sleep tomorrow, what's our role? I hope that this conversation gets sparked. This debate that we're having has the potential to have people in all sectors of our society ask themselves some serious questions about what they can do to help that kid's fundamental right be a reality. And maybe if you're a housing developer, you should say, what are we doing? Are we doing anything? Don't be afraid to say no or not. But if you do come to that honest conclusion, the next thing you should say, okay, so what are we going to start doing? Outside of our schools, we need to build housing and transportation that allow working people to thrive. We do need to raise the minimum wage, folks. It's just not sensible. We live in a society where there's worse income inequality than any time since the Great Depression. This society has plenty of money. It's just that most working people don't have much of it. And whenever time I read the paper about somebody getting a $167 million golden parachute, I'm thinking there's at least $166.5 million that should go to taxes for public education. That's just an editorial comment. But I'm telling you, I think that we've got to understand that you've got to pay parents better if you want better outcomes for the kids. If the parents can't even afford notebooks and books at home, and the parents can't afford to take a kid to a park, and they can't afford the basics of what it means to expose kids to stuff, then all the onus goes onto the school system. Put the parents in a position by paying employees better in this America. And we don't always look at paying employees as a good thing. Somebody said, oh, well, good news, we have very little inflation growth because, of course, wage pressures have been very low. And I'm like, how's that good? Good for somebody, not the people who I live near. People I live near need a raise. Maybe some bonuses need to be stagnant for a while. And I also think that we've got to take the criminal justice system seriously. I want to commend the Sentencing Guidelines Commission for having this debate around capping probation. Now, you may think, what does this have to do with what we're talking about, Keith? Well, just go talk to some kid whose mom is on probation for 40 years, what that kid's life chances are if mom can't vote, mom can't do this, mom can't do that. Mom, no matter how good she's been over those last 40 years, she's still a felon, and it's tough to get any kind of decent work. Now, when I bring up these outside the classroom points, a lot of people will say to me, well, Keith, look, don't let the school system off the hook. Everybody's hoping to be able to blame somebody else. I agree with that point of view. We should do all that we can with the resources that we have. What we have is an election in November in which we have the chance to make education a fundamental right. Education, public education. Education, quality public education. We have the chance to do that. And I want to invite you to this conversation, invite you to this debate. I want you to put your ideas out there. But at the end of this debate, no is an endorsement of the status quo, which we all find unacceptable. No is saying it's fine how it is. No will invite litigation. No is not all right. Saying we're doing plenty, we're doing this, we're doing that, we don't need to make any changes, we're doing fine. Well, look, God bless you in your little program that you're running. Maybe you are having good outcomes. But as a class, we're not. And we need everybody to take that seriously. And I just want to wrap up by saying, it's been a long time since we've looked at this constitutional amendment around education. In 1857, for example, the education clause was introduced into our Constitution. And I don't think that it's been updated since then. Women couldn't vote. So when we were trying to educate people, we weren't talking about women. Black folks were still in bondage, and Native Americans were treated as enemy nations. I think it's time to take another look, to examine what we might do to have the best state, not just today, but for a generation. That depends upon the opportunities we open up for our children today. You and I are going to get out on the highway and benefit from Eisenhower-era infrastructure as we drive home. Did you know that? What is this generation going to do for the next one coming up? Are we willing to do something kind of crazy? Change the Constitution to make education, quality education, public education a fundamental right for our kids, and then live up to that high mark that we've set for ourselves? I certainly hope that we will. Last word. Right now, my office is in the middle of a lawsuit. We are the defendants. And we have been sued because some parents find the condition that their children are having to learn in inadequate, not good enough, and unsuited to their needs and their future because of persistent systemic discrimination. Our defense, it might not be great, but it's adequate. That's legal. We could win with that. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? We might win if we convince a fact finder or court that it's adequate, Judge. It might not be that great, but it's adequate and it's uniform enough. We could win, even though the numbers are so bad. Because of this situation, I've decided I'm helping. Because of this situation, I said that I'm in. But we didn't just start defending the case and say, no, it's okay, we'll call them experts, all that. We decided to engage in a process of mediation so that we could talk it out and try to maximize opportunities for our kids. To come up with a process of mediation where we would hear expert information from not just experts, but parents and kids and everybody, and we listen to people and try to come up with a settlement that perhaps, maybe, that would do good for our children. We're going to keep doing that no matter what happens here. But how much better it would be if the people of the state of Minnesota got to weigh in on the kind of educational system that they want for their future. Let's go get this thing done, guys.
Attorney General, that was fantastic. Thank you for those remarks, and thank you for your support, your leadership, and your passion. Just to remind everybody, we're going to have a brief conversation up here, and then I hope you'll stick around. We're going to have a reception afterwards, so I hope you can join us and just have informal conversation with all of you. Let me just respond one thing that you said, Attorney General. You know, Justice Page and I we've been meeting with everybody under the sun, educators, legislators, other elected officials, community leaders, and business leaders. And one of the conversations we had with the CEOs, and Doug Baker said it here today, was we said, you know, this might take more money to get better outcomes. And they said, we are willing to spend more money to get better outcomes. We're not willing to spend more money to get the same outcomes. And so they've said that to us over and over and over again. So they'll take your deal.
Well, I'm glad to hear that news, and I think that's very encouraging. Look, General Motors does not expect to pay less, to not pay for the steel that it uses to make the cars.
Right.
Right. And as a state, we cannot expect to not invest in education and still get the workforce that we're looking for. So I'm very glad to hear that.
So let me ask both of you a question, which is, you know, you both have careers in civil rights. At the core of this is about creating a new civil right. And I think it's hard for people to envision what creating a new civil right can lead to. I mean, when I think about it, it's potentially transformational, but that's a conceptual idea. Could you just each speak about what does a new civil right mean and why is it so important?
Well, I don't. We're already mic'd up.
Yeah.
I would just note that I grew up in the 1950s, and there were places I couldn't eat, places I couldn't go, things I couldn't do simply because of the color of my skin. Brown versus the Board of Education, while it was specifically focused on education, it sounded the death knell for state-sponsored apartheid. That's big. That's huge. Brown started the vindication of my rights as a human being. And the proposal that we've made creates not only the civil right, but a means to have that right vindicated.
I'll talk about another right. How about the right to freedom of expression? You know, not too long ago, I was in Cairo, Egypt, and there were some people I was talking to who were working on coding, like computers. But they don't have a fundamental right to freedom of expression, so they don't have a right to protect what they wrote. And so, you know, like the president or the president's son or the president's nephew can just say, hey, look, I'm your new business partner. You don't have any rights that flow from that right to freedom of expression to protect your ideas. And so because you don't really have those rights, I believe that society stagnates because it can't unlock the creativity of its people because its people can't have any ownership over their ideas. And so let me just tell you, the fact that we have freedom of expression in this country is not just great music and art and poetry and song. It's actually great innovative achievement that is guaranteed by our Constitution. I mean, you know, all over the world, you know, the United States is a place where people come to vent creative ideas because the Constitution protects your fundamental right to freedom of expression. I can name other ones. Let your imagination flow. What if you didn't have a fundamental right to a jury of your peers? Now, we know that there's racism in the criminal justice system. I work on it every day and have worked on it every day of my adult life. But if you've ever been to a country where there is no right, well, what the Crown Prince just does is say, get him. And if he doesn't like you, we don't waste time on trials. You have no possibility of being exonerated because you're innocent. There's no appeals. As a matter of fact, if you're mouthing off too much, the Crown Prince might send some goons up to a foreign country and cut you up with a bone saw. Constitutional rights matter. They do matter, and it's one of the best things about this country, even though this Constitution was, in fact, defective from the start. People gave everything, even their lives, in the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement to make it better, but it did get better, and because of that, we can sit in this room and discuss this idea. But we're not done. So the question is, what are we going to do now? What are those of us in our 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s going to do for the people who aren't born yet?
Let me ask each of you, Justice Page, you touched on this earlier. We've talked a lot about opportunity to reach one's potential, to reach one's dreams, to open doors. But let's also talk about what it means in terms of justice and in terms of means if we don't do this, and the costs and the consequences of allowing so many children to not reach their potential.
Well, you know, a lot of what we see, at least what I saw, particularly with young people who came through our judicial system, was grounded in a lack of hope. I mean, yes, there were some people who had no moral compass, but far more of them simply had no hope. And thinking about Dr. King's upcoming birthday, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he once suggested that people who have hope want to build and create and protect the society they live in. People who don't have hope are inclined to want to destroy that society. Education is the greatest hope creator that I can imagine. You know, I've had the good fortune to work with and be a part of the lives of more than 7,500 young people through the Page Education Foundation. And those young people, not only through the opportunity to have some assistance going to college for themselves, but are required to create hope by tutoring and mentoring young people. And to see how those folks grow and develop and become productive, good members of our community, have become productive, good members of our community, is, I mean, this is just, for me, this is just an extension of what we're doing there.
Absolutely.
Attorney General, what do you see? You're the state's top law enforcement officer.
You know, I think that if we don't do this, then we will be left with the status quo. And the status quo starts us with an adequate system of uniform, adequate education. I don't know the exact language. Some other people in the room do. I can tell you that debates around adequacy are emotionally unsatisfying. We want to talk about doing great, not doing adequate. Uniform, what if it's all bad? I mean, the bottom line is there are some great stories going on, but the status quo is not acceptable. I will also say this too. I hope that as we think about a fundamental right to a quality public school education, we do also reignite the idea that having people of different ethnic stories in the classroom together is part of that educational process. I hope that, we do say that, racial healing, racial understanding, acceptance of the fact of our multicultural society is part of what it means to be an educated person in America today. We've kind of drifted from that, kind of thought that that was soft stuff, not that important. It's all about reading, writing, math. But those psychosocial, emotional learning things that we talked about, part of that means that that there are some people who, yes, they're from Somalia. They may not have been born here, but they're here now. And yes, there's people who speak Swedish and there's people who speak Chinese, and they're all part of this world that I live in. And to them, my language is weird and my name's not the average, And I hope that is something we don't lose in this conversation, because I think it's critically important.
Can I just follow up on that? I had the privilege of serving on our state's highest court. There are 7 members to that court. We did well, not because we had 7 Allen pages. You wouldn't want 7 Allen pages because it's all the same thing. We did well, we did better, and I assume the reason we have 7 members of that court is because you get 7 different perspectives. And each one of us learns from the perspective of the other 6 members. And that made us all better. That same thing happens in the classroom. Hearing different voices, hearing different perspectives, somebody who's seen things slightly differently, it enriches all of our ability to think and comprehend. And you're right, we don't talk about that, but that may be as important as anything.
I believe it.
So in terms of, we have about 5 minutes before we're going to break for the reception. I guess, Attorney General, love to get your advice on how we take this forward. I look at this and I think it's pretty remarkable, the group of people we've already assembled. Very different walks of life, typically people who don't agree on much, and yet they're saying, no, we agree on putting children first. As you think about this as the Attorney General, former member of Congress, former representative here, what do you see the path forward looking like?
Well, I think that we need to generate a lot of conversations. If you are in favor of this idea, or even if you're not sure if you're for it, but just kind of think you might, grab the folks in your affinity group and just say, hey, this is what we're going to talk about today. Like if you are an investment advisor, if you have a Wednesday lunch with your colleagues, just say, let's talk about the constitutional amendment today, right? We can talk about, yield spreads later. We're going to talk about kids today. If you're in a sewing group, if you're in a mosque, synagogue, church, talk in your affinity groups about this. We did constitutional amendment in 2012. I don't think this one's going to be just like that one, those two. But I do think one thing that will be similar is it's going to require a lot of conversations, and people are going to slowly make up their mind. I'd say people who don't agree with you, don't try to bludgeon them with your point of view right away. Bring them along. How many times have you gotten an idea in your head, thought you disagreed, woke up the next morning, and started letting it ruminate? Let other people have that same ability to sort of reflect on what the conversation has been. I'd say that, make sure that there's no there's no zip code that we're not touching. We need a map, just like a straight up map. And have we talked to everybody on every piece of geography in our state? I think it's great that the business community is interested in this conversation. We should also have the faith community in this conversation. We should also have, we should have the building trades. We should have people who are in education, all walks of it. So that's the thing. You need it will take energy and it will take resources, honestly. But I think it's really critical to do that. I'd say you two should keep your mind open, because there might be some tweaks here and there that could make it a better product. I don't know that there's not. Yeah.
I am all open to something that will make it better.
Yeah.
I will say categorically, I am not open to something that will make it worse, make it less. Indeed, make it better. I mean, help me out here. If we can make it better, let's do that. But walk away from it in a heartbeat if we start going down the road of weakening it.
I agree with that. I mean, another thing, the way to win this is to make sure that you know how to say no and you know when to say yes to a suggestion. I mean, that's one of the beauties of this amendment, in my view. It sets purpose. And purpose is always great at helping you say to determine what to say yes to, what to say no to, and because you have a purpose, you're going a certain place. I feel that our education system is a little bit adrift, and we got all kinds of stuff we're trying to get done with no real united purpose. That's how come we got all these super talented, smart people, and we're not getting the outcomes that we want. Because I think we need to get together on what's the main thing. And I think you all will be required to articulate that for people time and time and time again.
When you don't know where you're going, any road will take you.
That's true.
Well, we could keep going for much longer, but we're going to have the reception afterwards. Please join me in thanking the Attorney General and Justice Page, and thank all of you. Let me say one quick thing. We're going to have the reception out. Let me just say thank you to all of our speakers who are here today. Thank you to all of you who've taken your afternoon to be with us. And I want to thank all the staff at the Minneapolis Fed. A lot of people worked really hard to put this together. So thank you for pulling it together very quickly. And we'll see you in the reception. Thank you for coming.